The sun scorched the concrete at Naval Base Arlen as Harper Quinn stood motionless in the final candidate lineup, her dust-covered combat boots rooted beside 20 men in pressed uniforms and mirrored sunglasses. She was the only woman present, and they made sure she felt it. One candidate loudly whispered that she must have taken a wrong turn on the way to HR. Another nudged his friend and laughed as he mimed tripping in boots, 2 sizes too big for Barbie. Her sweat-darkened name tag was already peeling at the edges, the dull insignia on her chest barely clinging to its thread. And when she shifted to brace under the weight of her rucksack, an instructor grinned and barked. That's the problem with equality. No one tells the cute ones they don't belong. Phones captured it, chuckles echoed, and even the senior chief didn't look up from his clipboard. She said nothing, moved no faster, and kept her eyes fixed on the white tape line across the range, where each candidate would later be tested. When her turn came, no one paid attention until her third shot cut through the air with a sharp, perfect crack, and the first bullseye lit up red on the monitor. Then came the second, then the third. Her stance never wavered. Her breathing never changed. As she cleared the jammed weapon handed to her mid-test with clinical ease and fired again without a pause, the laughter stopped. When the final round slammed into the hardest target at 500 meters dead center, under timed pressure, the digital board displayed a score that hadn't been reached in over a decade. Silence rippled across the yard. Not ceremonial, but stunned. And then, for the first time all morning, every single man looked up. Harper Quinn lived in a 2-room apartment above a motorcycle repair shop on the edge of Corpus Christi, a place where the nights were quiet and the salt air rolled in from the Gulf. Her home was spare and organized, almost sterile, with only a small table by the window, a mattress on the floor, and a treadmill wedged into the corner beside a set of weights. Most mornings began at 04:30 sharp, the same time she'd risen for years while enlisted, and though no one was watching, she still ran 3 miles in the dark, followed by 45 minutes of strength drills in silence. On one wall was a framed degree from the University of Texas, next to a faded photograph of her father in his Navy uniform. And below it sat a locked green footlocker, its surface scratched, the hinge worn but solid, always kept closed when company visited. To the civilian staff at Naval Operations Command, Harper was the tactical coordinator who showed up early and left without fanfare, the one who reviewed training simulations and sent efficiency memos that few officers bothered to read. Her job title, Logistics Analyst, third, barely hinted at her background, which was deliberate. She'd served 8 years in the Navy, most of it overseas, much of it classified. Her personnel file listed her deployments as supply-side rotations in Djibouti and northern Kenya, but it never mentioned the outpost she helped defend during a 3-day siege or the small, unmarked range where she taught nighttime firing sequences to candidates bound for Black Ops insertion teams. In one of the drawers beneath her sink was a Navy Commendation Medal awarded after a mission no one acknowledged, wrapped in cloth beside a broken watch that had stopped the moment shrapnel took her spotter's life. His name was Lieutenant Sophia Lerner. She bled out beside Harper after a trainee missed a clean shot during a high-pressure drill, a mistake traced back to faulty instruction and poor vetting. Harper never forgot the way command framed it, later collateral loss. No direct fault assigned. That was the day she decided she wouldn't teach again until she could control the terms. She filed her separation papers 3 months later, moved back to Texas, and took the analyst job when no one would place her as an instructor without documentation she wasn't allowed to disclose. The file she carried when she walked into the SEAL team program a year later didn't list her full record. But it didn't need to. She knew the ones who judged her wouldn't read past her title anyway. Her application had raised eyebrows. Some assumed it was a political gesture, civilians applying for integrated training roles under a new departmental initiative. Others thought it was a joke. She didn't explain herself. At work, one of the lieutenants joked that if she got a spot, maybe next year the Navy would let interns pilot submarines. The others laughed. She nodded once, turned back to her screen, and said nothing. That was her rhythm move through the noise. Wait for the range. There was a difference between saying you could do something and knowing the exact wind correction for a 600-meter shot in an open desert with no cover and 4 lives depending on you. In public, Harper looked like someone who avoided confrontation. She kept her hair tied low, wore gray sneakers that blended into her uniform slacks, and spoke softly when asked questions. Her colleagues called her steady, low profile, and once, behind closed doors, forgettable. She didn't take offense. That was part of the design. The more invisible she stayed, the less resistance there would be. The fewer questions asked, the fewer answers she would have to lie about. Only her sister, a middle school teacher in San Antonio, knew the full extent of what she had done, and even she didn't know about the Foot Locker. On weekends, Harper sometimes drove to a decommissioned range in the outskirts of town, using an old clearance code that still worked on the gate keypad. She brought her own paper targets, printed with faint grids and scored circles, and practiced alone under fading sun. Her grip never wavered. Her breathing never rushed. Every motion was silent and deliberate, trained into her by years of repetition. She never looked up until the final round was fired. It wasn't about perfection. It was about precision, under pressure. That was what had been missing the day Sophia died. That was what she planned to correct. When Harper arrived on base for the first official day of SEAL selection, she wore the same faded cap she had trained in years ago and a standard-issued duffel slung low over her shoulder. Her boots were clean but plain, her uniform pressed but anonymous. As she walked across the compound, she passed a few instructors who didn't look up, and a cluster of candidates who didn't pause their conversation. One of them glanced her way and leaned into his friend with a smirk, saying just loud enough to carry, "Must be admin support." Harper kept walking, eyes forward, her steps even. No one recognized her. That, too, was part of the plan, the first time it happened. Harper was crouched in a clearing just before the final room of a tactical course, rifle angled low, her eyes sweeping the doorframe like she'd done 100 times before. Instructor Ramos stood behind her, arms folded, voice raised for the benefit of the entire group. "Everyone freeze," he barked, stepping forward to gesture at her stance. "This is what hesitation looks like. See how she's squared her shoulders, center mass exposure. That gets you dropped first. Let this be a warning to the rest of you." No one laughed, but a few exchanged looks, and someone muttered, "Classic." Harper stayed frozen until dismissed, then stepped out of the formation with the same pace she'd entered. Later, she would hear that a second team had filmed the moment from the upper walkway, a private clip now circulating as an internal joke. "She moves like a spreadsheet." One caption read. Another simply said, "Tactical Barbie's big day." She was handed a compass during the next navigation run, told to lead a group through dense scrub under time pressure. The numbers spun wildly after the first 10 minutes, and they missed the checkpoint entirely. When they returned late and out of breath, the instructor waved the malfunction off with a shrug. "Shame about your guide," he told the group. "But in real combat, you don't get to pick your teammates." The others looked at her and said nothing. That night, she checked the device again in her bunk and found the dial misaligned, the internal ring floating loose. Whether it had been broken before or after it reached her hands didn't matter. She logged the failure, then went out behind the barracks and ran sprints until her legs burned. The next day, during a forced march in full gear under a heat index of 105, she was told to carry the extra kit bag, a weighted pack meant to simulate emergency evac supplies. It rotated between candidates, but no one volunteered to take it from her at the halfway mark. When she stumbled for the first time, shifting the strap over her shoulder, Sergeant Wilkins called out from the rear, "That hesitation just killed 6 civilians. Want to try again?" The squad was circled and dropped for push-ups. "This is what happens when one weak link drags the chain," he added. By the time they stood again, no one looked in her direction. She began waking before the alarms, slipping out for extra runs in the pre-dawn dark, counting off quiet pull-ups in a shadowed corner of the obstacle yard before the others showed up. Her palms split open by the second week, and she taped them without comment. Her sleep shrank to 5 hours, then 4. The ringing in her ears came and went. She started eating in silence, alone, facing the wall while others traded stories or laughed about upcoming rotations. One morning, she found her canteen refilled with salt water, the faint, bitter aftertaste catching just after her first swallow. She poured it out without speaking, refilled from the locker room fountain, and never mentioned it again. Instructors never called her by rank, only by last name, and rarely without comment. Miller, take the breaching ram. Quinn, go last. Let's see what cleanup looks like. During a corridor drill, she was told to go first and then faulted for being too slow. The door ahead of her stuck slightly on the hinge, and when she stepped back to brace again, she heard Sergeant Krause behind her exhale loudly. Jesus, this is why we stick to proven configurations. The others were rotated through quickly after that. She wasn't called back in. During close-quarter simulation, Harper's headset failed completely halfway through the drill. The audio cut out, leaving her blind to the commands being fed to the other participants. She cleared the final room using hand signals and training protocols. But the instructor marked her down for non-compliance. When she explained the malfunction, he shook his head. Gear checks are your responsibility. Quinn, always. She didn't argue. She signed the mark and filed it away in her memory beside the others. Not all the candidates participated in the cruelty. A few looked away. One handed her a spare bandage during a break after seeing the raw edge of a cut beneath her glove. But none spoke up. None stepped in. Even those who seemed uneasy kept their distance, as if afraid proximity might cost them points by association. Harper understood. The program was designed to test more than ability. It tested perception. Who looked the part? Who made others comfortable? She had no interest in comfort. Her locker was moved twice. The second time, she found a smear of grease across her nameplate and an empty shell casing placed neatly on the shelf inside. It was unsigned. She wiped the plate clean and kept the casing, slipping it into the same pouch as her father's belt buckle. She no longer expected fairness. She expected resistance. She logged every insult, every shift in tone, every policy selectively enforced. Then she went back to training. By the third week, Harper had become a figure of contrast, silent while others cracked jokes, unbending while others swayed through exhaustion. She didn't shout, didn't pace, didn't curse, but she also didn't miss a step. During a circuit run with field packs, she finished dead, last, but never stopped. Even after vomiting quietly behind the final barricade, the others watched her straighten back up, wipe her mouth with the edge of her sleeve, and rejoin the line without a word. On the final day of endurance testing, she was assigned to scale the rope tower last. The sun was dropping, casting long shadows over the compound as instructors gathered around, clipboards in hand. The rope was slick from the heat and worn thin near the top. Her arms trembled halfway up, shoulders burning, muscles near collapse. No one offered encouragement, but no one spoke either. She reached the top after nearly a full minute, touched the beam, then descended slowly, legs shaking beneath her. When her boots hit the ground, she straightened, nodded to the instructor, and walked back to the staging line. The others stood watching, no longer amused, just silent. The summons came at the end of the third week, delivered in a sealed envelope left on her bunk. It contained a printed memo marked Confidential Command Evaluation, signed by two officers Harper had only seen from a distance during observation days. The meeting took place the following morning in Building 17, a squat concrete structure tucked behind the administrative wing of the base, far from the training fields. Inside, the lights buzzed faintly, and the walls were lined with framed mission photos and faded commendations. At the end of a long conference table sat Commander Felix Dorn, flanked by Deputy Commander Rhodes and a civilian aide who remained unnamed and silent. The screen behind them showed a spreadsheet of attrition rates overlaid with notes on candidate performance metrics. "Miss Quinn," Dorn began, gesturing for her to take the seat across from him. "We've been reviewing your file, civilian and military, and we're impressed. Very impressed." His voice was steady but detached, as if reading from a prepared note. "Your background in logistical oversight, field coordination, and policy development is frankly underutilized here." He tapped his pen against a folder, then slid it forward. "We'd like to offer you a role that better aligns with your experience, training, policy, coordinator, strategic planning, curriculum development. Something impactful." Harper didn't move. Her hands remained flat on the table. She glanced once at the folder, noting the gold-embossed seal and fresh cardstock. Dorn went on. "This is not a demotion. Quite the opposite. You'd be shaping the next generation of operators, ensuring that field protocols evolve. You'd have full clearance, input on tactical simulations, even liaison privileges with SOCOM." He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "It's a better fit. And frankly, more sustainable. We've seen what you've endured during selection. And while we admire the grit, we have to ask at what cost." There was a moment of silence, the kind built for agreement. Harper kept her eyes on the folder, then looked up and replied evenly, "I'd prefer to continue with the qualification course." The air shifted slightly. Deputy Commander Rhodes exhaled softly through his nose. Dorn's jaw clenched once. "You understand?" he said after a beat. "That qualification isn't just physical. It's about integration, perception, risk analysis. There are factors beyond individual performance." Harper nodded. "Yes, sir. I do." The meeting ended without ceremony. She left the folder on the table, unopened. As she exited, the aide leaned in and whispered something to Dorn, who responded without looking up. "Then start flagging the variable metrics, quietly." By the next morning, small but unmistakable changes had begun to take shape. The obstacle course time requirement dropped by 30 seconds. The weighted run increased in distance. A cold water immersion drill was added without prior notice. Candidates now had to complete rifle breakdowns during timed endurance runs. Nothing official was posted. The instructors simply adjusted their orders in the field and marked failures accordingly. Rumors spread quickly. No one mentioned Harper by name, but everyone knew who the changes seemed tailored for. "They're raising the floor to shut the window," one candidate said during chow, not even trying to lower his voice. Harper heard him, but didn't respond. She had stopped sitting, with the others entirely, preferring an empty bench at the edge of the compound. Her uniform was clean but worn at the seams. Her gloves, already frayed, were taped again by hand. In the evenings, while the others went to briefing or rest, she disappeared into the far end of the base, an old equipment shed with rusted locks and a half-lit corridor, barely used since the last renovation. Inside was a manual range module, still operational, where she practiced silently. She adjusted to the new standards on her own time, logging each drill on a notepad she folded into her vest pocket. When one of the instructors noticed, he made a remark about civilians always needing extra practice. She acknowledged it with a nod and resumed loading her rifle, The manual she'd taken from the meeting room, an outdated copy of the SEAL prep curriculum, sat beside her boots each night, filled now with margin notes and taped inserts. She wasn't trying to win their favor. She was trying to finish clean. Behind closed doors, Dorn and Rhodes exchanged messages about performance bands and metrics thresholds. If she's off by even half a second, we flag her. One email read, "If she passes, we need a contingency." Another note suggested reviewing the original application approval to see who had signed off. The implication was clear: they hadn't expected her to get this far, and now the institution was reshaping the test rather than acknowledging its own underestimation. One evening, as Harper ran the new endurance course alone, an instructor timed her from the shadows without calling out her splits. She completed the circuit just under the revised cutoff, knees shaking but posture unbroken. He marked the time, frowned, and walked away without speaking. The next day, the pull-up requirement increased. The official reasoning was combat standardization alignment, though no one could cite a directive. Still, it held. Harper returned to the range that night, chalked her hands, and did the new number until her shoulders seized. The other candidates had begun to notice. A few watched her from a distance, uncertain whether to admire or avoid her. One asked during cool-down if she ever thought about quitting. She didn't answer. She simply folded her towel, walked to the rack, and returned to finish the final drill without missing a rep. Her silence unsettled them more than confrontation ever could. By the end of the 4th week, Harper's name appeared more frequently on failure logs, yet she remained in the program. She didn't appeal scores, didn't ask for reevaluations. Her file grew heavier with notations, but her presence never changed. She still woke before dawn, still trained in shadows, still left no complaint behind. One morning, before the compound lights came on, she walked alone across the gravel toward the training field. The wind had picked up, stirring dust along the outer fence. Her gloves were already on, her helmet clipped to her pack. Inside the operations office, Commander Dorn watched the cameras flicker on and muttered to the aide beside him, "Get me the updated test metrics. Let's see what we can work with." The final qualification began under a dull gray sky, the air heavy with salt and sweat as instructors clipped new parameters to the side of the command tent. Word had spread before sunrise that the course had changed again. Candidates leaned close to whisper guesses: longer range distances, new obstacles. Stress intervals tightened to the second. One muttered that a rumor on the comms said today's test was designed by special warfare consultants brought in from North Carolina, built to thin the list. He added, "No one's supposed to breeze through." Harper stood near the back, watching quietly as the first names were called forward. Each candidate was given the same sequence gear check: timed stealth crawl through a sand-draped compound, a forced elevation sprint, weapon disassembly and reassembly mid-drill, and live fire from multiple positions: prone, kneeling, standing. Targets appeared at staggered intervals, the furthest at 500 meters and partially obscured. Misses meant penalties. Seconds mattered. Some of the early candidates stumbled during reloads. One lost time trying to chamber a round in wet gloves. The instructors gave corrections, barked encouragement. "You're good, adjust posture. Breathe on the hold. Nice recovery." Harper remained silent, her eyes following each pattern, tracking the pace. The wind shifted mid-morning. By the time the 10th candidate went up, dirt swirled across the range in light spirals. A few managed solid scores, but none broke the upper tier. The best time posted was just over 11 minutes, with 2 near misses. Harper's name remained uncalled. A clipboard rotated between instructors, names checked off in descending order until only one remained. Lieutenant Brenner finally looked up and called, "Quinn." There was a pause in the group, followed by an audible sigh from somewhere near the tent. Brenner looked to one of the other officers and said, half under his breath, "$10 says she doesn't finish." Harper stepped forward and tapped the worn face of her watch once, before setting it to 0. Her movement was unhurried. She adjusted the strap of her vest, checked her optic, and ran a gloved hand across the edge of her weapon. When the buzzer sounded, she launched into the crawl with the steadiness of someone pacing breath rather than urgency. Her elbows cut narrow channels through the sand. Her boots never dragged. The transition into the sprint was smooth. No pause. No adjustment. She cleared the platform and dropped into the prone position in one motion. Her hands moved with deliberate precision, breaking the weapon down in 5 controlled movements, wiping the chamber, and snapping it back into place. Somewhere near the observation station, a junior instructor looked down at the timer and blinked. Halfway through the course, her rifle jammed. She didn't react. Her hands moved instantly, flipping the receiver open and checking the feed. A dull, metallic sound clicked beneath the casing. Something left in the chamber, just enough to misalign the bolt. Whether intentional or careless, it didn't matter. She cleared it, chambered clean, and resumed without a breath lost. Her feet slid into place, her shoulder reset. She fired again. Every target struck clean. No edge hits, no grazes. Each transition flowed like breath, her body folding and rising with mechanical rhythm. She moved from kneeling to standing without readjustment. Her aim didn't shake. Her eyes didn't blink. When she reached the final position, the hardest shot obscured, distant, wind-crossed. She paused, adjusted her grip, and fired once. The round landed directly through the inner circle. The buzzer stopped. She reset her watch, stepped back, and began breaking down her rifle for inspection. The silence held. Instructors who had been chatting now stood still. One turned to the screen. The time flashed across the digital board in bright red: 9 minutes and 27 seconds. Accuracy 100%. No errors logged. Sergeant Krause walked to the monitor, checked it again, and called for confirmation. A second officer ran the video. No penalties, no resets, no adjustment time required. Captain Holden, the visiting Special Warfare Commander, leaned closer to the feed and narrowed his eyes. "That form," he said quietly. "I've seen that before." He walked toward the inspection bench as Harper was logging her rifle, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. "Where'd you train?" he asked, voice low. Harper looked up once, then returned to sealing the case. "SEAL instructor rotation, Horn of Africa detail," he said aloud, piecing it together. "Camp Tirani. You were on the platform there." A nearby aide hesitated. Sir Holden shook his head. "She trained half our current recon group." Krause looked up, expression tight. That true Harper didn't answer. She reached into her collar and pulled the worn medallion out just far enough to be visible, the faded symbol of her former unit still pressed into the steel. Then she tucked it back beneath the uniform and stepped aside. A murmur passed through the group behind her. One candidate who'd mocked her during week 1 now looked at the ground. Another checked his own timesheet, then slowly folded it. Brenner glanced at the record, then back at the board, then back at her. "Where the hell did she come from?" he muttered, but not loud enough to be brave. The clipboard in his hand no longer mattered. Holden turned back toward the command tent and said only, "That score stands." No one responded. No one protested, not even the instructors. Harper remained still for a few seconds longer, then walked to the far edge of the range and sat in the shadow of the observation tower. Rifle cradled in her lap, gloves resting on her knee. Behind her, the scoreboard continued to glow. No one had moved since it updated. Captain Holden remained by the monitor, arms crossed as instructors circled in closer, none speaking above a whisper. The glow from the scoreboard painted the edge of the tent in red light, her time still frozen at the top. Krause stood stiffly, his pen hovering over the clipboard he had used all month to record failures and faults. Now it was blank. Across the range. Harper holstered her weapon with clean, fluid motion, then stepped back from the firing line without a glance. Behind her. She didn't look for reaction. Didn't wait for confirmation. She had already begun to remove her gloves when Holden's voice carried over the silence. "She trained my unit," he said clearly, addressing no one and everyone at once. 8 years ago, forward base in Tirani, we ran joint drills before deployment. Same technique, same timing, no wasted movement. The instructors turned slowly. Someone near the observation table coughed into his hand, then looked away. No one challenged him. They didn't need to. His voice carried authority, not opinion. A lieutenant standing beside the range officer finally broke the stillness. "She's not even in the system under that billet," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "Just shows as logistics." Holden nodded once, the kind of nod that meant exactly. "You never read past the front page." One of the instructors who had laughed during her first week took a step forward, stopping a few paces short of her. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Instead, he said, "Good run, Quinn," and offered the clipboard for her review. She glanced at it, nodded, and declined to take the pen. Another officer, younger, unfamiliar, leaned toward her as she prepared to leave the range. "Why didn't you just say something?" he asked, not unkindly, almost confused. She checked the safety on her rifle and answered without pause. "I thought this program tested performance, not talk." Then she turned and walked toward the edge of the lot where her pack rested. No emphasis, no anger, just a simple truth laid down like a stone in still water. The officer didn't respond, but several others looked between each other in silence. Behind them, the scoreboard still held. Someone whispered that it might be the fastest time ever recorded under the revised structure. Another asked if the range file should be submitted for review. No one had a definitive answer, but no one questioned the result. Holden stepped back toward the group of instructors. "You've been operating with half the data," he said, "and she still beat every one of your standards." There was no challenge in his tone, only finality. Kraus walked to the side table, set the clipboard down, and rubbed the back of his neck. "Guess that's on us," he said quietly. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. The damage wasn't done by her presence, it was undone by their assumptions. Harper said nothing more. She returned her rifle to its case, tightened the strap on her pack, and adjusted the medallion at her collar just enough to tuck it beneath the shirt again. The sun was beginning to lower behind the storage hangars, casting a warm line of light across the gravel lot. Candidates who had outpaced her in early runs now stood watching from the shade, their chatter gone. One of them, the same man who had snorted when she stepped onto the range, now studied the scoreboard as if trying to understand what it meant. He didn't say a word. As Harper crossed the final row of mats, she passed by the bench where Brenner still sat with his arms folded. He didn't speak. His eyes followed her until she disappeared beyond the edge of the tent. She left no trail of confrontation, no lingering claim to victory, just the facts of what had happened, what she had done, and what no one had expected. That night, someone removed the printout of updated testing metrics from the clipboard outside the admin trailer. It wasn't replaced. No formal announcement was made. No adjustments were posted. But in quiet corners, instructors began reviewing footage. A training lead updated internal briefings with the new standard as a reference point. And inside the command tent, a few performance logs were marked pending review, circled in red ink that had not been used all cycle. Harper didn't stay to watch. She walked alone back toward the barracks compound, her pack steady against her shoulders, boots clicking evenly across the stone path. Behind her, the range fell into silence again, this time not from failure, but from understanding. No one called her name. No one stopped her. No one had to. They had already seen everything they needed. The compound was quiet in the early hours, the kind of stillness only broken by the low thud of boots on sand and the soft clicks of rifle components being checked and reset. Harper moved easily through the range now, no longer watched with suspicion or amusement. Instructors greeted her with nods. Candidates addressed her with respect, not hesitation. No ceremony had marked her official placement on the team. Her name simply appeared on the active roster one morning, tucked between two others with longer records but shorter memories. During drills, she was no longer singled out. She was rotated like the rest, relied upon when formation patterns shifted, and called forward when precision mattered. A younger recruit, barely 20, fresh from another base, stumbled during a kneeling transition. Harper adjusted her own stance, fired clean, then paused beside the woman and corrected the angle of her support elbow without fanfare. The recruit nodded, tried again, and hit the target squarely. "Thank you," she whispered. Some of the officers who had once laughed at her now lingered during her training sessions. They watched from a distance, sometimes taking notes, sometimes silent. None apologized. She didn't expect them to. She wasn't there for their comfort. She'd already proven her worth by the only measure that mattered: consistency under pressure. Change came quietly, not through statements, but through shifts in routine. A few drills she'd designed during her unofficial range nights were added to the rotation. No one credited her name, but the structure was unmistakable. Off-duty, Harper organized small evening sessions in the maintenance hangar. No titles, no expectations, just space for female recruits to train, ask questions, and study angles most manuals left out. She ran the sessions with the same rhythm she brought to the range: calm, exact, unhurried. One night, an officer she hadn't spoken to since week 1 stood outside the hangar door, watching through the open frame. He didn't come in. He didn't need to. 2 weeks later, that same officer submitted a proposal to formalize off-duty skill groups for underrepresented candidates. It passed quietly. At the foot of her bunk, a marked-up field manual remained open, notes covering every page. Her medallion, once hidden, now hung visible over her chest. When she stepped out onto the range each morning, a new set of recruits waited, some steady, some unsure. She adjusted one girl's posture and said, "The hardest target isn't distance. It's being seen as capable before you even shoot." Then she stepped back and watched her fire. Harper Quinn never raised her voice, never demanded recognition, and never asked for anything beyond the chance to show what she could do. She endured isolation, mockery, and silent sabotage not by fighting back, but by moving forward. Her story is a reminder that self-worth is not granted by others. It is carried, often unseen, in the quiet choices made when no one is watching. She proved that true strength does not always look loud or forceful. Sometimes, it looks like calm persistence in the face of doubt. In a world that often rewards performance over principle, Harper chose both and changed everything. If her journey moved you, take a moment to reflect on your own. Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories about quiet strength, silent battles, and the power of being underestimated. Some of the most powerful changes begin with those no one saw coming.